Chapter 2 of Tante. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Denise Nordell. Tante by Douglas Sedgwick. Chapter 2. The hush that had fallen was like the hush that falls on Alpine watchers in the moment before sunrise, and, with the great musicians slow emerging from below, it was as if the sun had risen. She came with her indolent step, the thunder of hands and voices greeting her, and those who gazed at her from the platform saw the pearl-wreathed hair and opulent white shoulders, and those who gazed at her from beneath saw the strange and musing face. Then she stood before them, and her dark eyes dwelt, impassive and melancholy, upon the sea of faces, tumultuous and blurred with clapping hands. The sound was like the roaring of the sea, and she stood as a goddess might have stood at the brink of the ocean, indifferent and unaware, absorbed in dreams of ancient sorrow. The ovation was so prolonged, and she stood there for so long, hardly less the indifferent goddess because, from time to time, she bowed her own famous bow, stately, old-fashioned, formally and sublimely submissive, that every eye in the great audience could feast upon her in a rapturous assurance of leisure. She was a woman of 48, of an ample though still beautiful figure. Her flowing dress of white brocade made no attempt to compress, to sustain, or to attenuate. No one could say that a woman who stood as she did, with the port of a goddess, the small head majestically poised over such shoulders and such a breast, was getting fat, yet no one could deny that there was redundancy. She was not redundant as other women were, she was not elegant as other women were. She seemed in nothing like others. Her dress was strange. It had folds and amplitudes and dim disks of silver broideries at breast and knee that made it like the dress of some Venetian lady, drawn at random from an ancestral marriage coffer and put on dreamily with no thought of aptness. Her hair was strange. No other woman's hair was massed and folded as was hers, hair dark as night and intertwined and looped with twisted strands of pearl and diamond. Her face was strange, that crowning face known to all the world. Disparate racial elements mingled in the long southern oval and the Slavonic modeling of brow and cheekbone. The lips, serene and passionate, deeply sunken at the corners and shadowed with a penciling of down, were the lips of Spain. All the mystery of the South was in the grave and tragic eyes. Yet the eyes were cold, and touches of wild ancestral suffering, like the sudden clash of spurs and the languors of a polonaise, marked the wide nostrils and the heavy eyelids and the broad, black, crooked eyebrows that seemed to stammer a little in the perfect sentence of her face. She subjugated and she appealed. Her adorers were divided between the longing to lie down under her feet and to fold her protectingly in their arms. Calf-love is an undying element in human nature, a shame-faced derogatory name for the romantic, self-immolating emotion woven from fancy, yearning, and the infection of others' ardor. Love of this foam and flame quality, too tender to be mere aesthetic absorption in a beautiful object, too selfless to be sensual, too intense to be only absurd, rose up towards Madame Okraska and encompassed her from hundreds of hearts and eyes. The whole audience was for her one vast heart of adoration, one fixed face of half-hypnotized tenderness. And there she stood before them, Madame Okraska, whom crowned heads delighted to honor, Madame Okraska who got £1,000 a night, Madame Okraska who played as no one in the world could play, looking down over them, looking up and around at them as if, now, a little troubled by the prolonged adulation, patient yet weary, like a mistress assaulted after long absence by the violent joy of a great Newfoundland dog, smiling a little though buffeted, and unwilling to chill the ardent heart by a reprimand. And more than all, she was like a great white rose that, fading in the soft, thick, scented air of a hothouse, droops languidly with loosened petals. They let her go at last, and she took her place at the piano. Her hands fell softly on a group of dreamy ascending chords. Her face then, in a long pause, took on a rapt expectancy and power. She was the priestess waiting before her altar for the descent of the god, glorious and dreadful. And it was as if with the chill and shudder of a possession that, breathing deeply, drawing her shoulders a little together, she lifted her hands and played. She became the possessed and articulate priestess, her soul, her mind, her passion lent to the message spoken through her. The tumult and insatiable outcry of the Appassionata spread like a river over her listeners. And as she played, her face grew more rapt in its brooding concentration, the eyes half closed, the nostrils wide, the jaw dropping and giving to the mouth an expression at once relaxed and vigilant. To criticize with the spell of Madame Okraska's personality upon one was hardly possible. Emerged from the glamour, there were those, pretending to professional discriminations, who suggested that she lacked the masculine and classic disciplines of interpretation, that her rendering, though breathed through with noble dignities, was colored by a capricious and passionate personality, that it was the feeling rather than the thought of the music that she excelled in expressing, its suffering rather than its serenity. Only a rare listener, here and there among her world-wide audiences, was aware of deeper deficiencies and of the slow changes that time had wrought in her art. For it was inspiration no longer, it was the memory of inspiration. The nemesis of the artist who expresses not what he feels but what he is expected to feel, what he has undertaken to feel, had fallen upon the great woman. Her art, too, showed the fragrant taint of an artificial atmosphere. She had played 10 times when she should have played once. She lived on her capital of experience, no longer renewing her life, and her renderings had lost that quality of the greatest, the living communication with the experience embodied in the music. It was on the stereotyped memories of such communication that she depended, on the half-hypnotic possession by the past, filling in vacancies with temperamental caprice or an emotion no longer the music's but her own. But to the enchanted ear of the multitude, professional and unprofessional, the essential vitality was there, the vitality embodied to the enchanted eye by the white figure with its drooping, pearl-wreathed head and face sunken in somber ecstasy. She gave them all they craved, passion's stormy struggle, the tears of hopeless love, the chill smile of lassitude in accepted defeat, the unappeasable longing for the past. They listened, and their hearts lapsed back from the hallucinated unity of enthusiasm, each to its own identity, an identity isolated, intensified, tortured exquisitely by the expression of dim yearnings. All that had been beautiful in the pain and joy that through long ages had gone to the building up of each human consciousness re-entered and possessed it. The fragrance of blossoming trees, the farewell gaze of dying eyes, the speechless smile of lovers, ancestral memories of springtimes, loves, and partings, evoked by this poignant lure from dim realms of subconsciousness, like subterranean rivers rising through creeks and crannies towards the lifted wand of the diviner. It seemed the quintessence of human experience, the ecstasy of perfect and enfranchising sorrow, distilled from the shackling, smirching half-sorrows of actual life. Some of the listening faces smiled, some were sodden, stupefied rather than enlightened, some showed a sensual, rudimentary gratification, some, lapped in the tide, yet unaware of its significance, were merely silly. But no Orpheus, wildly harping through the woods, ever led more enthralled and subjugated listeners. Gregory Jardine's face was neither sodden nor silly nor sensual, but it did not wear the enchanted look of the true votary. Instinctively this young man, though it was emotion that he found in music, resisted any too obvious assault upon his feelings, taking refuge in irony from their force when roused. For the form of music and its intellectual content he had little appreciation, and he was thus the more exposed to its emotional appeal. But his intuition of the source and significance of the appeal remained singularly just and accurate. He could not now have analyzed his sense of protest and dissatisfaction, yet while the charm grasped and encircled him, making him, as he said to himself, idiotically grovel or inanely soar, he repelled the poignant sweetness, and the thrills that went through him were thrills of half-unwilling joy. He sat straightly, his arms folded, his head bent as he twisted the end of his mustache, his eyes fixed on the great musician, and he wondered what was the matter with him or with her. It was as if he couldn't get at the music. Something interfered, something exquisite yet ambiguous, alluring yet never satisfying. His glance fell presently from the pianist's drooping head to the face of the protégé, and the contrast between what was expressed by this young person's gaze and attitude and what he was himself feeling again drew his attention to her. No groveling and no soaring was here, but an elation almost stern, a brooding concentration almost maternal, a dedicated power. Madame Okraska, he reflected, must be an extraordinary person if she really deserved that gaze. He didn't believe that she quite did. His dissatisfaction with the music extended itself to the musician, and, looking from her face to the girl's, he remembered with skepticism Betty's account of their relation. A group of Chopin preludes and a Brahms Rhapsodie Hongroise brought the first half of the concert to a close, and Gregory watched with amusement during the ensuing scene the vagaries of the intoxicated crowd. People rose to their feet, clapping, shouting, bellowing, screaming. He saw on the platform the face of the massive lady, haggard, fierce, devouring; the face of the shy lady, suffused, the eyes half dazed with adoration like those of a saint in rapture. Old Mrs. Forrester, with her juvenile auburn head, laughed irrepressibly while she clapped like a happy child. The old poet was nearly moved to tears. Only the protégée remained, as it were, outside the infection. She smiled slightly and steadily, as if in a proud contentment, and clapped now and then quite softly, and turned once and scanned the audience with eyes accustomed to ovations and appraising the significance of this one. Madame Okraska was recalled 6 times, but she could not be prevailed upon to give an encore, though for a long time a voice bade intermittently, "The Berceuse, Chopin's Berceuse." The vast harmonies of entreaty and delight died down to sporadic solos, taken up more and more faint-heartedly by weary, yet still hopeful, hands. Still smiling slightly, with a preoccupied air, the young girl looked about her, or leaned forward to listen to some kindly bantering addressed to her by Sir Alliston. She hardly spoke, but Gregory perceived that she was by no means shy. She so pleasantly engaged his attention that when Sir Alliston got up from his seat next hers there was another motive than the mere wish to speak to his old friend, in his intention of joining Mrs. Forrester for a few moments. The project was not definite, and he abandoned it when his relative, Miss Eleanor Scrotton, tense, significant, and wearing the sacramental expression customary with her on such occasions, hurried to the empty seat and dropped into it. Eleanor's enthusiasms oppressed him, and Betty had told him that Madame Okraska was become the most absorbing of them. His mother and Eleanor's had been cousins. Her father, the late Sir Jonas Scrotton, heavily distinguished in the world of literature and politics, had died only the year before. Gregory remembered him as a vindictive and portentous old man presiding at Miss Scrotton's tea parties in a black silk skull-cap, and one could but admire in Miss Scrotton the reverence and devotion that had not only borne with but gloried in him. If the amplitude of his mantle had not descended upon her, one might metaphorically say that the black skull-cap had. Gregory felt that he might have liked Eleanor better if she hadn't been so unintermittently and unilluminatingly intelligent. She wrote scholarly articles in the graver reviews, articles that he invariably skipped. She was always armed with an appreciation, and she had the air of thinking the intellectual reputation of London very much her responsibility. Above all, she was dowered with an overwhelming power of enthusiasm. Eleanor dressed well and had a handsome, commanding profile with small, compressed lips and large, prominent, melancholy eyes that wickedly reminded Gregory of the eyes of a beetle. Beneath the black feather boa that was thrown round her neck, her thin shoulder blades, while she talked to Mrs. Forrester and sketched with pouncing fingers the phrasing of certain passages, jerked and vibrated oddly. Mrs. Forrester nodded, smiled, acquiesced. She was rather fond of Eleanor. Their talk was for each other. Miss Woodruff, unheeded, but with nothing of the air of one consciously insignificant, sat looking before her. Beside Eleanor's vehemence and Mrs. Forrester's vivacity, she made Gregory think of a tranquil landscape seen at dawn. He was thus thinking and looking at her when, as though subconsciously aware of his gaze, she suddenly turned her head and looked round at him. Her eyes, in the long moment while their glances were interchanged, were so clear and deliberate, so unmoved by anything but a certain surprise, that he felt no impulse to pretend politely that he had not been caught staring. They scrutinized each other gravely, serenely, intently, until a thunder of applause, like a tidal wave surging over the hall, seemed to engulf their gaze. Madame Okraska was once more emerging. Miss Scrotton, catching up her boa, her programme and her fan, scuttled back to her seat with an air of desperate gravity. Sir Alliston returned to his. Mrs. Forrester welcomed him with a smile and a finger at her lips. And as the pianist seated herself and cast a long glance over the still, disarranged, and cautiously rustling audience, Gregory saw that Miss Woodruff had no further thought for him. End of Chapter 2. Recording by Denise Nordell, Modesto, California.